So this is going to be the third talk that I'm going to be doing on the subject of how to be good. And I just want to say it's good to have everyone who's watching online. We're sorry about last week, but we're glad to have you back with us today. We had some problems with our streaming last week. So, as I say, this is the third series. And, I mean, the whole idea is to look at how do we respond to the times that we're living in at the moment. And just a little previously on, in the first week we looked at the root meaning of the word goodness. And when you look at the root meaning, it actually means to unite, to bring together as a fit. And when you look at that secondary meaning of goodness, that includes kindness and benevolence and graciousness and holiness, you can really see what uniting is about. It's about all those sorts of things. And the ultimate way that we want to unite is we want to unite with that divine nature that's at the center of everything. That's the aim of what we're trying to do. We also saw that, in truth, what everybody wants in life is a good society. We just have different ways of thinking how we might get there. And our role, I think, now is to work out how do we respond to the circumstances that are coming our way from a point of view of goodness. And last week we looked at the decision to be good that's necessary before we start. We have to make a decision. It has to be a conscious thing that we do. And we talked about the idea of erecting a tripod of faith and doubt and determination, and see that our spiritual work is not just for our own ends. We don't do the spiritual stuff for our own ends. It's not just a nice to have, but it's the way that we make our contribution to the evolution of consciousness. We enact what is called the bodhisattva vow, which is by saving all sentient beings by adopting the spiritual path. We save others by adopting that spiritual path. And in Christianity, that path is loving your enemies, not resisting the evil one, going the extra mile and feeding the hungry. Those are the traditional things. In Taoism, it's your enemy is the shadow that you yourself cast. What is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? So there's this sort of balance in things that we need to be aware of. And in this way, our practice, our spiritual search, I think it has to be one of engagement with what's going on in society rather than just an abstraction that's important to us and our well-being. It's about creating a sure foundation for our lives so that we become channels of that peace that's within us to that which is around us, knowing that we doubt that, is anything that we do going to make any difference, but having faith and the determination to stand firm in it. That's really what we've come to see the idea of spirituality is about. That's what practice is for, and that's why we're here. And as I said last week, there is nothing that the agents of chaos fear more than the real presence of goodness. That is their kryptonite, the real presence of goodness. So if you want to catch up on anything that in previous ones, if you look at the seats in front of you, the red card will show you how to catch up on the previous episodes, and the blue card, you can join our mailing list. So, having adopted that path of personal transformation, having decided that we want to be good, of uniting with the divine through our practice or whatever it is, what we have to do is undertake that spiritual practice and then look at how we live this in our lives. How do we act authentically in realizing the good that's within us? I mean, it's often when you try to be good, it's like you put on a face of empathy. There's that, when you look at people, you just move the head to one side slightly. And you're listening to what they're saying. You're sort of there. It's a kind of reassurance, We just, want to be good. We want to be kind. We want to look after people. We fall into trying to enact those concepts of goodness and graciousness and kindness and benevolence, even holiness. We want to be holy to people who are around. And it's no wonder that, it doesn't always feel quite right. We don't actually feel that there's something genuine about it. And it doesn't really always, produce that uniting that is at the heart of all goodness. Our ideas of kindness, we want to put on that kind face and be nice to people. Zen masters are notorious for their shocking response to students as they awaken them in goodness. Zen masters aren't kind. They're not nice. They're not, they don't come into that way. I have said this story before, but I know loads of you haven't heard it. I always like the story of the guru of the pointing finger. Now, the guru of the pointing finger, there was once a guru who lived in a remote part of India. And he was famous for the way that he enlightened students. And every day, they'd congregate in the great hall, and the guru of the pointing finger would come in, and he'd sit down in his chair, and there'd be a silence. And at a certain point, he would stand up, he'd walk to the front of the room, he'd raise his hand like that, and he'd point his finger. And then he'd sit down again, there'd be silence, and he'd walk out. And, what would happen? He'd sit for a different length of time, and, the guru became famous because many of his pupils became enlightened, just in the way that he did it. Now, one day, a young man came to the ashram, claiming that he wanted to join and learn from the guru of the pointing finger. And he was taken and given a job in the kitchen. After a few months, the young man became disenchanted with the ashram. He began to fidget during the silences, and he began to make fun of the guru. He'd appear in different groups of people and pretend to be the guru and point his finger dramatically like this, when he entered the library, or, copying the movements of the guru and pointing up to the heavens like that. One day he was doing his job in the kitchen, and he was particularly bored, and he swept in and he dramatically raised his arm and pointed up. Now, unbeknown to him, the guru just happened to be in the kitchen at the time, and he witnessed the charade. And the guru quickly walked across the room, picked up a sharp knife from the table, and as he went with one slash, he severed the finger off the student. The young man screamed with pain and shock, clasped his bleeding finger, and the guru went up to him and went like that. And instantly, the student was enlightened. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all go off and, cut fingers off and things like that, nor that we are unkind. But there is something shocking in the response that's outside the concepts of goodness. I mean, that whole story, Zen masters, behaved like that in the old days. But, that story shows that it's not the case. I remember once we had a Zen master here, and Robert Kennedy, not that one, Robert Kennedy, his name is a Zen master, and he came. And someone stood up and said something about love. The whole traditional thing. And he laid into this bloke. And everyone was totally shocked. But he was not going to have it that, goodness is something which is sort of nice face, all that sort of stuff. There's something deep beyond that. We have to shock ourselves into the authenticity of goodness. The story showcases the authenticity that is centered around the absolute determination for a goodness to appear. The guru was acting authentically with what he knew. Now, The root meaning of the word authentic is principle, genuine, and of course you've got the root author, which means to originate. That's when we're trying to live authentically, that's what it's about, authoring. But the question we have to ask is, what are we authoring? What are we originating? If we are originating our behavior from our minds, then it's just coming from the small self. More of the ideas that we've come up with. It's just the best of our own thinking. But if that wisdom is originated from that ordering principle that's within us, if we're authoring from that divine nature that's within us, from our unity of consciousness, then we are truly bringing good into the world. We're bringing that good that only God can bring into the world. It was Jesus that said, "Don't call me good, only God is good." That good that is at our center is being brought into the world. There's another famous story of someone called Francesco Bernardoni, who was a restless young man. He was unable to find his calling. His dreams were being of a heroic knight. And he turned into a bit of a nightmare. And he was spending a lot of his time, he spent some time as a prisoner of war, and things weren't going very well in his life. He wanted to be this knight, and his father, Pietro, wanted his son to follow into the family business. So he didn't really know what to do, as that didn't interest Francesco either. So he found himself wandering around the outskirts of his hometown in the village, in the hills of Umbria, lots of breathtaking vistas at every turn, which he hardly seemed to notice until he came upon San Damiano, a little church in need of a bit of repair. And he entered and he knelt down underneath a huge wooden crucifix painted in the Byzantine style of an icon. And the open eyes of Jesus on the cross seemed to lock him with a stare that was both intimidating and beckoning at the same time. And he couldn't look away as the feelings of doubt and fear and guilt and desire welled up within him. And he said to the statue, "Lord, what do you want me to do? Show me what you want me to do with my life." And he heard an answer, a voice as clear as anything said, "Go and rebuild my church, which, as you see, is falling down." Now, at that moment, St. Francis of Assisi was born, because Francesco turned into St. Francis of Assisi. And for St. Francis to be born, Francesco Bernardoni, that doubting, fearful person, had to die. And to some extent, that transformation has to be the same for us. We have to move from our personalities, the person that we think we are, to something that's rooted in that goodness. The Tao Te Ching says, if you realize that all things change, there is nothing you'll try to hold on to. If you aren't afraid of dying, there is nothing that you can't achieve. And Francis Bernardoni was not afraid of dying, of letting go of all his desires for being a knight or his father's desires for going into the business. And as a result, St. Francis of Assisi was born. Jesus said, "Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it will bear much fruit." Now, I'm not saying that we have to die or become someone completely different, but the willingness to die in these terms is really about the willingness to give up control of the outcomes of the situations we find ourselves in. Living authentically from our hearts rather than living from our minds, which is really what we've been talking about here. It involves giving up the desire to manipulate and control those that we are being good to. As we live in our lives, we feel that frustration. We want to do things, but, we do want a specific result. And what stops us a lot of the time is the fact that we don't think that we're going to be able to get a specific result. We don't know how to be good in that sort of way without trying to control the situation. What we're asking in this situation is we're not attempting to bring people around to our way of thinking. We're simply being authentically good by coming from our hearts rather than our minds. That verse I mentioned, the Tao Te Ching, goes on to say, trying to control the future is like trying to take the master carpenter's place. When you handle the master carpenter's tools, chances are you'll cut your hand. It's really not up to us to shape the future. It's up to us to show up authentically in the presence, and in doing so, we leave the future to take care of itself. And I think that's actually quite freeing, because it means that we don't have to worry about, am I going to make a difference here in what I'm doing? Because it's not up to us to make a difference to anything. We don't have to worry about that. It's up to us to show up in the moment authentically from our hearts. We do what we do, and we allow our contribution to do what it does. And it also means that, we don't have to worry about setbacks, times when things don't seem to be going our way. The truth is that they'll never go our way, and they're never meant to go our way. They, in traditional terms, they go the way of the Lord, or the Tao, or the Buddha way, or the way of Christ. Never our way. And it's not the setbacks that we have to be concerned with, it's how we respond to those setbacks. And, that goes for the little things, the spats. We get disheartened by the missteps that happened, the mess-ups. And the bigger things, the diagnosis that we have, the social environment that we find ourselves in, the way that the world is going. We shouldn't really be preoccupied with how to get things to go in a different way. We don't have to be preoccupied with that. That is to handle the master carpenter's tools. And chances are, when we try and make things go a different way, we will cut our hands. Our role is to show up authentically here from our hearts and respond from the heart, even if it means cutting off someone's finger, metaphorically speaking. We have to let go of ideas as to what should be happening, let go of our ideas of trying to control, and die to our minds and let our hearts respond. Ward always used to say that the longest journey is the journey from the heart to the mind, from the mind to the heart. That is the longest journey to take. And that's what we're trying to do here. It's the second step on how to be good. The first step is to erect that tripod of great doubt, great faith, and determination. And the second step is to decide to live authentically from the heart. And I can hear myself thinking, it's easier said than done to live from the heart rather than the mind. And I think that's right. It's a difficult job to decide or to discern when we're being authentic from the heart or when we're doing what our mind thinks is best. Especially, really when it's our mind that's deciding whether we're coming from our mind or my heart. And I think that's where spiritual practice comes in. Our practice is the practice of coming from the heart rather than the mind. Some people say, I don't need a spiritual practice. I just work out what to do and then I just do it, which is exactly what the mind would say. Whether it's meditation or prayer or walking in the mountains, the practice is the practice of growing the heart. That's really what spiritual practice is about. It's about practicing growing the heart. And, Archbishop Rowan Williams famously said, to put it boldly, meditation is the only ultimate answer to the unreal and insane world that our financial systems and our advertising culture and our chaotic and unexamined emotions encourage us to inhabit. It's the only ultimate answer. To learn meditation practice is to learn what we need to do so as to live truthfully and honestly and lovingly. It is a deeply revolutionary matter. And this is really where the revolution takes place. To move to the next level of consciousness, to bring good into the world, to live authentically from the heart, requires this sort of practice. I mean, sort of, when we go to the gym, we practice for sports. In the music room, we practice for instruments. And it's beholden to us to practice our spirituality. If we really want to show up authentically, we have to practice that. Now, many of you may have a practice, and many of you may not. And if you haven't got a practice and you want to have one, then come and see me, or arrange to have a chat. You can come to some of the meditations that we do. Heather does Monday morning meditation on Zoom. I do one on Tuesday in the morning. Mimi does meditation and yoga in the evenings. There are lots of opportunities. And I'm going to sort of trail this again a bit later on, but during Lent, which starts on March the 2nd, Lent's the period between Ash Wednesday and Easter, I'm going to suggest that anybody that wants to have a Lenten interview, come see me about their spiritual life. You can just ring up, make an appointment, and we can have a hour-long conversation about your spiritual life, whatever it is. Just chat it through over a series of Lenten interviews. I think nothing is more important right now. We think, what do I do? It is really living from our hearts. It is really practicing how to do that. You either join in with the general throng that is thrown hither and yon by the next headline, or you dig within to the source of living water that all of us are connected with. Jesus famously said, everyone who drinks this water, he's talking about the wisdom from within, everyone that drinks this water will never, be thirsty again. Indeed, the water I give you will become within you a spring welling up to eternal life. That is what that living water is. And this is where we need to go to find our hearts or our authentic selves. And when we do that, we find the ability to let go of the desire to control, to die to our minds and begin to live in the moment from our hearts. And I think that is the kind of transformation we do need at this time. And we don't have to worry about the effect that our practice has. Our role is just to give up to it, because it does have its effect. Koin Yamada says in his book, The Authentic Gate, you should know that the effects of even one period of meditation makes an impression on the subconscious mind. When you decide to practice and sit with complete fervor, whether for an hour or just 5 minutes, you perfectly and fully manifest your unstained, essential nature. The effects of that meditation, even though you may not be aware of them, will never disappear from your personality. Additionally, since the nature of the essential world is one is all and all is one, if you reveal that peerless self-nature, even for a moment in the world, then the entire universe is also rendered pure and unsurpassed. That moment has an effect on everything around you. In his talk, Wholehearted Practice, Dogen says, because meditation, even done by one person for a short time, unifies everything in the universe and harmoniously becomes one with every instant of time in the entire flow of time, it ceaselessly works in infinite worlds, in present, past, and future, to accomplish the salvation of all sentient beings, which is the goal of all bodhisattvas and our goal too. So practice is what it takes to be good in the world. touching that essential nature that's within us not only affects us, but it affects those who are around us. And that's the eternal truth that's gone through all major religions in the world. And that's what we're left with, our own personal practice. So I really want to encourage you to take on that practice in your lives as a way of bringing good into the world. Thank you. Mark. Thank you.
I finished a nice book last night called, wait a minute, not The Precious Mind, whatever it was. One of the main themes in the book, and they deal with meditation, they deal with love, they deal with time, the mind and the heart, is not to accentuate one over the other. They're all a dynamic that work together. The mind informs the heart, and the heart must inform the mind. And that's all.
Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting. I think in meditation...
Oh, The Passionate Mind, right. It's The Passionate Mind Revisited is the name of the book.
The book's called Passionate Mind Revisited. Thank you. I think that is interesting because I was reading an instruction on meditation, and it said, don't worry if you get thoughts coming into your mind during meditation, because those thoughts that come in are also part of that greater self, a part of your heart. And I think you're absolutely right. The mind and the heart do operate together. I think the danger is that when the heart is not fully engaged, that's when the mind can go off. And yes, the mind and the heart together operating is incredibly important. But that authenticness that's what I think the heart brings us, that authentic nature, and informs the mind. So thank you for that. I think that's good. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, Brendan, thank you.
Always a little reluctant to say something every week, but I always have, whatever you talk about always seems to stir up a lot for me. So again, I appreciate that. But have you come across Ian McGilchrist at all?
I haven't, no.
Okay, so he's a psychiatrist, but also sort of a neuroscientist, and he wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary. And it's a parable. That is a parable about the master is a warm, loving, everything that you were talking about in terms of the good.
Yeah.
And as his message is spreading, he realizes that he can't actually administer to the kingdom, so to speak, so he sends this emissary out on his behalf. But then as the emissary gets further and further out, he kind of loses connection with the master, and then he thinks that he is the master, right? And then the idea is that this hemispheric brain represents these two ways of being in the world, the right brain and the left brain. And he goes to great lengths to not cheapen it like pop psychology, but there's some really interesting things that happen there. And so I was just actually listening to a podcast with him this morning on the way in, and one of the things he says that ties into what you had mentioned, Heather, is that the left brain tends to enclose into certainty, whereas the right brain opens up into possibility. And so I think meditation for me is the right brain watching the left brain and trying to sit into that right brain and just sort of detach a little bit from all of the chatter and the need to be in control and things like that. So yes, that's my comment. And I would suggest anybody who's interested, Ian McGilchrist has written 2 books, and he's brilliant to the edge of almost not being able to understand him because he's so smart. But The Master is Emissary, and then The Matter of Things, and it's all about how Western civilization is a reflection of these 2 parts of the brain.
And his name again is?
Ian McGilchrist.
Ian McGilchrist. Fantastic, thank you. Anybody else like to make a contribution? Yes, Mimi, thank you.
Just one thing to remember is that you have more neurons going from your heart to your brain than you have from your brain to your heart. And sensing those neurons that go from your heart to the brain is what you practice for.
Yes.
Because it's not all about the brain. And I recently read a really good book by a neuroscientist who's also a meditator. And it was one that Marianne Williamson suggested, and it's called Into the Magic Shop. And I would highly recommend that because it's not hard to understand. And the message is really strong.
Even a kid can do it in that book.
Yes, an underprivileged kid who, on Maslow's pyramid was at the bottom. He came from a really poor family, so it's a really, really inspirational book.
And there are quite a lot. Eric, you were mentioning that book. David Lynch's book, what was David Lynch's book called? Do you want to give Eric the thing as well? These books that actually, do
the famous filmmaker David Lynch recently passed away, and I thought I'd revisit his works, and I discovered this wonderful book that he wrote called Catching the Big Fish. And it's all about coupling his love of meditation, which he found incredibly liberating. It liberated him from his deep anger and angst and his ability to deal with very difficult things like death and violence in a positive and creative way. It's a very simple and delightful read. I highly recommend it.
Thank you, Eric. And I think, this idea of expanding the heart, when we look out into our world and the circumstances that we find ourselves in, we often think, how do I get things to change? And the message really that I've been having is, the first thing we have to do is to change ourselves and transform our manifestation in the world. That is the place that we can affect. And we think it's not going to make a difference to what's going on, but we actually don't. We have to die to that. We don't know it's not going to make a difference. But we do know that we can make a difference to ourselves, and we can, even one period of meditation, as it says, as Yamada says, changes who we are in a subtle little way, even if we can't tell it from a day-to-day basis. So it really is worth developing that aspect of the heart as we go on. So these are two examples books that talk about that. Anybody else like to say anything?